Okay, in the last lesson, we kind of looked at like the border layout and the grid layout, and we ran into the problem where if we use a border layout, we can only add 5 things on there. And what we would like to be able to do is like add our hello button to the south and maybe also add our bye button to the south, right? So what happened when I put this bye button here? Yeah, it just went into the center, right? So that's its default location. And if I run it again, we kind of see like the last name label should be in the center, but because I added the buy button, it just took over that location. Okay, so let's say like, well, that was dumb. Why don't we just add it to the south, right? What's going to happen if I just add this to the south now? Right, it's just going to take over from the hello button, right? So if I run this time, okay, it says say goodbye. I want both of those buttons to show up in the south, right? And so the answer to do that is using what's called a panel, all right? And so I want you to think about like when you guys make a poster, right? You might take like a note card or a piece of paper, put a bunch of stuff on that, and just put that piece of paper or that note card on your poster, right? And so if you want to think about it, that's like your frame. And you can put as much as you want on that little note card, but the poster just knows that it has a note card. It doesn't know what's on the note card. Okay, so that's the same idea that we're going to use here. Instead of adding these two things to this, we're going to add them to a panel, and then we're going to add the panel to the frame or to this. All right, so the way you do that is you go ahead and you create what's called a JPanel. All right, and since I'm putting buttons on this panel, I'm going to call it button panel. All right, and I want that to be a new JPanel. And the nice thing about panels is when you create them, you can tell them what you want their layout to be. So right here, I'm going to say, well, I want these 2 buttons in there. I don't really care how they look in there, so I'm just going to make a new flow layout. All right. So JPanel has to be imported just like all these other GUI components do. So I'm going to import that. Down here then, what I'm going to do is, so here's a little thing, like I like to indent what I'm adding to my button panel so that I can kind of organize it for myself visually. Most people don't do that. If you don't do it, I don't care, but that's what I'm going to do. Instead of adding the hello button to the frame, I'm going to change that so that it's adding to the button panel. All right, and same thing for this other one. All right. And then after I'm done adding the things that I want on my button panel, I'm going to take the frame or this and add the button panel to it. Okay. Now, what kind of a layout does this have? Does my frame have? Nope. It has a border layout, right? So right up here, I set the layout to be a border layout, even though this comment still says flow layout. Okay, so it has a border layout. And so when I add the button panel, if I just do this, it's going to add it to the center. But where do I want those buttons to go? In the south. Okay, so I want to go comma border layout dot south. And what kind of a layout does my button panel have? It has a flow layout. Does it make sense to say that we are going to add these things to the south of a flow layout? It does not. So I want to go ahead and delete that, right? So I want to get rid of that. All right. And now what we've done is we've said like, hey, we're going to take this note card that we call a JPanel. We're going to add the hello button and the bye button to the note card. And then we're going to put the note card in the south, or the panel in the south of the frame. Okay, so when I run that, it looks like that. Now I have those 2 buttons in the south. Okay, if I expand this, again, center, north, west, and east, these 2 things are in the south. So the panel is invisible. We just know that we can use it to group things together. Okay, this stuff still looks like crap, right? We wouldn't want a frame like this. Okay, So we're going to use another panel, and we're going to kind of group those things, and we're going to put those in the frame as well. Okay, so like we said, the other stuff that's on there, the labels and text fields, it's organized very poorly, I would say. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another panel, okay? Take that panel, use a grid layout, and add that stuff on there, and that's going to help me organize the way I want this to look, okay? So let's do that right now. All right, we're going to start out by saying this is another JPanel, okay? And this time I'm adding, like this down here I said it was a button panel. This one I'm adding labels and text fields to it. So I could call it like this is the form panel, or, you know, labels and text fields panel, but then that gets really long. I don't really want to do that. But I know I'm going to put this stuff in the center, okay? So I'm just going to call this my center panel, if I could spell. All right? And so all I'm doing is just giving you an idea of, like, you can name these things whatever you want, but just try to make it a logical name so you'll be able to follow what it is you're trying to do. Okay, so I want this to be a new JPanel, and I want this one to have a grid layout. All right, so the grid layout that I'm going to use is going to be a 2x2. Okay, what happens if I don't put anything in there for what the grid is? Let's just take a look, right? Okay, so going through here now, I'm going to tab this in. I'm going to change this to center panel, but before I do that, I'm just going to copy center panel and then paste it in for this, okay? Paste it in for this, paste it in for this, and paste it in for this, okay? Where did I what? It automatically tabbed for me. Like, it figured out that yeah. Okay. It figured out that I wanted that indentation, right? I'm not sure how. Okay, so the other thing is here, now that I'm adding this to the center panel, just like we said before with the flow layout, there's no north in a center panel, so that doesn't really make sense to it. So I want to get rid of that. Okay, and I want to remember that I now have to add that panel to the frame. Okay, if I forget that step, then I've got all these things added to the center panel, but the center panel is just kind of floating out there, you know, like we said with the note card, right? If you're writing stuff on a note card or putting pictures on a note card and stuff like that, you still got to tape it to your poster. And so that's basically the idea that we want to have here. We want to say this, which is the frame, add center panel, and where do I want the center panel to go? Into the center, right? All right, and so then hopefully you have kind of a picture in your head of what this is going to look like already. But now when I run this, okay, it looks like that. Now, is that a grid layout? It is, right? Remember we said, like, let's just see what happens when we do a grid layout but don't give it dimensions, right? So it says, well, you want to add 4 things on? Easiest thing for me to do is a 1x4. Okay? I don't like it. Okay? So I would rather see that in a 2x2. So now I'm going to put in 2, 2 in there for my grid layout. Run this thing again. And that looks a lot better to me. Okay? That's a good question. So I just wanted to point out, like, to me, this looks like, well, in the beginning of the last lesson, you said you could use a grid layout in a 3x2, and that's what looks like we're doing right there. So why are we going through all this extra stuff? I mean, obviously I want you to learn, you know, more things than just the grid layout, but also if I expand this, can you guys tell that this is the grid and these are not a part of that grid? Okay. Right, because the text boxes got real big. The buttons would get big as well if they were a part of the grid. So these down here are in a flow. These are in this grid. Okay, that 2x2 grid. All right. So that's how you can combine things. And guys, what you're going to do as an assignment for this is you're going to make a calculator interface. Okay? Just the interface. I'm not expecting that your calculator is going to work exactly, right? So I want you to make something that looks something like that. All right? So yeah, some of you are starting to look at it already and say like, oh, I know how to, move things around or add things to it. So that's just what you guys are going to be doing, and you guys probably start that, either today or tomorrow. So,